Okay, we are going to begin the webinar. Welcome to everyone who is here now at this time and to those who will be seeing this recording. This lecture will be recorded and sent to those who registered and will be used also further on. And I originally planned this lecture actually for Nefesh B'Nefesh for New Olim as a lecture on how to navigate the food environment and make healthy food choices in Israel. But we went to war, which is a horrible thing, and it also very much negatively affects people's eating and their food choices. So I really felt that rather than canceling this lecture, I decided to just change the subject, and hopefully this will be something that can be helpful to you or useful to you at this time or in any time of crisis. So this will be a guide to healthy eating in a time of crisis. So why am I so passionate about helping people to lower their consumption of sugar? This is a picture of me when I was 32 years old, 25 years ago. I was 15 kilos more than I weigh today. I was a nurse on a kibbutz. I also used to joke that I could teach I could teach a dietitian about good nutrition. I knew a lot about nutrition. I cared a lot about nutrition, but somehow I couldn't apply all that wonderful knowledge that I had. And it was like got to a point where it was really, I was obsessing about food. I was never hungry or full. I just felt like I constantly needed to put something in my mouth. And here's the thing, like on the outward, so I was a heavy woman, but I was very optimistic and, and an outward person. But on the inside, I felt like a failure at the thing that I wanted to succeed at most, which was to lose weight. But the truth is that as long as I can remember myself, there was no amount of sugar that could suffice for me. If I got candy, I had to finish it immediately. It didn't matter how much it was. I was always like thinking, what could I buy? And you know what? I'm religious. I'm a rabbi's daughter. I grew up in Montreal, near Montreal, Canada. My father was the rabbi of the community, and there were many candies and junk food that wasn't kosher. And I was actually, like, in general, a good girl. I wasn't very rebellious, and I certainly believed in God and in religion. But when it came to the junk food, like, I would beeline for the chocolate bars, exactly that my dad told me were not kosher. I wasn't allowed. So even God couldn't come between me and my candy. But at this time, when you see the picture, things really got out of control until I heard somebody say to me that she lost weight by thinking about the way she eats as a food addiction, that she's addicted to food, specifically junk food, the same way, a drug addict is addicted to drugs and a heavy smoker is addicted to cigarettes. And it was like somebody put a light bulb on in my head and I said, oh my God, that's me. I'm a junk food junkie. And when I started looking for a solution to my addiction, that's when I actually really found a long-term way to keep my health, to keep my weight at a normal body weight, to feel better about myself, about food, and to really go into what I called food freedom. So today, my mission in life is to help people who feel that they're addicted to sugar or junk food or overeating, compulsive overeating, to help them free themselves, really give a long-term solution to freedom. But the other thing that I'm very passionate about is helping people to lower their sugar consumption. And you'll understand why as we go into this lecture, because sugar and specifically ultra processed foods, or the sugars that are in ultra processed foods, are addictive, just like any other substance of use and abuse. And the risk of addiction goes up the more that we consume these foods. So this is why I'm so passionate about it. For me, like my first solution was a 12-step program, but I realized, that in a peer support group where there are no professionals, some people really get it and some people don't. Some people connected to the 12-step program, some people didn't. And I said, how is it that there aren't food professionals, like professional people who professionally treat addiction, just like there are professionals who treat other addictions like drugs and alcohol? And that was when I began studying the science behind food addiction. I read books. I traveled the world to meet that. I'm talking to you about 12 years ago when this profession was really, really almost non existent. But I went to those few people around the world who were treating food addiction professionally. And since then, I have been researching the subject and I created a program called the Sugar Free Recovery Program. But as I said, I am very, very passionate also in the field of prevention to help people just to lower their consumption of sugar. And this is what we're going to talk about today, how in a time of crisis to just eat better. Maybe not perfectly, but how to get better so that we don't harm our health, we don't harm our waistline, we don't harm our quality of life by going into destructive eating habits. Now, I have put everyone on mute, but I am going to say that during this lecture, if you have any questions, please put them up in the chat. And once in a while, I will stop to answer questions, or we will have a question and answer period at the end. Okay, so you can just put in your questions in the chat as they come up, and at the right time, I will talk about them. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, sugar and processed foods. What's good about them, what's bad about them, and the ugly side of it. We'll talk also about what is harm reduction and how to apply it regarding food and eating when you're in crisis mode. Then I'm going to give you some really great tips that are doable and applicable to lower harm or to help you make better eating and food choices, even if you are in crisis mode. At the end of the lecture, I'm going to give a few words about what is food addiction, how to know if you're addicted to food, and to give you some of the real solutions for food addiction. So let's talk about we need to define a few terms here when we talk about this. So what is, for example, real food versus ultra processed food? Real food is the food that God and Mother Nature intended us to eat. Real food is as close to its natural form as possible. Real food is what you will find on the, outer aisles and in the edges of the supermarket. And real food is what humans have been eating for the last 10,000 years at least, since we've become a culture and we've begun cultivating food. But even before that, ultra processed food is food that did not exist until about 100 years ago. Ultra processed foods has been invented or created by human beings in a lab or a food factory. Ultra processed foods, you can't really know what you're putting in your mouth if you don't read the ingredients or the food label, just from looking right at the front of the label. Ultra processed foods, what characterizes them is they have usually many, many ingredients, and many of those ingredients are not something you're going to find in your kitchen. And ultra processed foods have been specifically engineered to and aggressively marketed to make them easy to eat, easy to chew, easy to obtain, cheap, convenient, socially accepted, and to keep you coming back for more. So, what is the secret recipe, or what I call the unholy trinity of ultra processed foods? What are the three main ingredients that characterize an ultra processed food? It is what I call the unholy trinity, or that threesome of sugar, salt, and fat. And then if you add to that sugar, salt, and fat these flavorings and aromas that maybe they're called natural, they've gone through like 1,000, 1,000 levels and phases until they actually made it into that ultra processed food. So let's think about this unholy trinity, right? If you think about natural foods, most natural foods are either sweet or fat. They're not both sweet and fat. And when I talk about sweet, I mean also starchy, because flours and starches are basically sugars that don't taste, taste sweet. So usually carbohydrates in nature that you'll find are low in fat. And fatty foods are very low in carbohydrates or almost don't have any. That's what we'll usually find in nature. What happens is with ultra processed foods, this combination of lots of sugar, lots of fat, and then some salt to make it, just to really make that combination so it's not nudgy sweet, and you can even make layer upon layer, and it's like this plethora of very, very delicious, much more stimulating than what nature intended, much more delicious than what nature intended, especially when we add these flavorings and aromas. And you basically get a food that is that its goal is not to what food used to be, where food it used to be if food was enjoyable, but it was something that we ate in order to get energy. It was like our fuel, just like in a car. But now with these ultra processed foods, the goal is hedonic eating. You know what? It makes the food so delicious and so amazing that the food industry even has a term for it. As a matter of fact, a journalist actually made a book with the name of this called the bliss point. It's that point where you like take a bite of that new flavor of ice cream or whatever it is, and it just woo sends you to the moon, right? It's like they say in Hebrew, mashu lo normali. It's not normal, but that's the truth. It really isn't normal. Food isn't supposed to taste that good. Food is supposed to be enticing and we want it when we're hungry and not that interesting when we're full. That's what real food should be about. So this bliss point, or this making these foods so much more delicious and stimulating and enticing than what nature intended, really causes us to have what's called to go into this mode of what's called hedonic eating, eating for pleasure, not to feel food full and not to feel hungry. So, and by the way, like this picture that you see here on the screen is a picture that was taken at the entrance of a Kupat Cholim, of a medical clinic near my home. This is what there is to eat. And this is what we are being inundated with. 70 to 80% of the foods in our grocery stores are ultra processed foods, that this is what they are. And you know what? If we think about it, even ultra processed foods of today are different than what they used to be. I don't Here in Israel, it used to be a sufganiya, or like the donut and Hanukkah was like, a ball of dough with some raspberry jam inside and maybe some like, powdered sugar on top. And today you have 20 flavors and it comes out 2 months before, as soon as Sukkot ends, it's like right there in the stores, all the stores. So all these ultra processed foods are getting richer and more delicious and more addictive and cheaper and easy and more socially acceptable than they ever were before. So let's talk about the two vicious cycles that ultra processed foods put us into. The first one is we have to remember that not all calories were created equal. The calories that are in ultra processed foods cause more inflammation in the body and are more fattening, calorie versus calorie, than the calories in real food. Why does that happen? It happens because when we eat ultra processed foods, it spikes our blood sugar and it spikes insulin. There are a lot of reasons why ultra processed foods cause inflammation, the vegetable and seed oils, but that's a whole other lecture in of itself. So we're just going to talk about like the really main points. And one of the main points of ultra processed foods is they spike blood sugar, and the hormone that regulates our blood sugar in our body is called insulin, and it spikes insulin. And when we have too much sugar in our blood and therefore too much insulin in our system, it causes the whole system to break down. It causes inflammation. It causes our body to accumulate fat, and it causes us to, calorie versus calorie. It's like the most fattening food that you can eat, sugar specifically, but the sugar, especially in ultra processed foods. And so I want to show it to you, this explanation from a wonderful movie called That Sugar Film by the director and actor Damon Gameau, where in 3 minutes he explains how sugar spikes, how sugar causes us to get fatter and sicker than other foods.
After sugar enters the body, it splits into two parts, fructose and glucose, both of which make their way to the liver. Now, once in the liver, the glucose is dealt with efficiently. It's either used immediately for energy or it's stored for later, like a spare battery. But the fructose half of sugar is very different. The liver doesn't have a system to regulate the fructose because it was so rare in nature. So it hoovers it out of the bloodstream whether it needs it or not. And if all our spare batteries are full, then it rapidly turns it into fat.
Some of that fat is going to stay in the liver, and you're going to have increased risk for insulin resistance and diabetes.
What also happens is that this fat in the liver is then sent out into the bloodstream as triglycerides, which can lead to excess weight, plus blocked arteries and heart disease. Now, when we're eating lots of sugar and other carbohydrates like bread and pasta, we're producing lots of glucose. A hormone called insulin is released, which is like a key that helps to open our cells' doors so they can absorb all the glucose, remove it from the bloodstream, and burn it for energy. The more glucose in the blood, the more insulin is released. But the key point for us is that while this insulin is in the blood dealing with all the glucose, it tells our fat cells to hold on to the fat. It actually turns off our fat-burning processes. So when we're eating lots of sugar, we're putting fat into our bodies via the fatty liver. Plus, because of all the glucose, we maintain the level of insulin, which tells our fat cells to hold on to the fat. We can't burn off fat when insulin is around dealing with all the sugar. This is what may be happening to a huge number of the population.
So, what happens when, as Damon Gameau said, we're eating too much sugar, which is causing our body, on the one hand, to accumulate more fat, on the other hand, to tell our body not to release the fat that's stored, and on the third hand, causing inflammation, which can cause a whole slew of diseases. This all happens from something that's called insulin resistance. Basically, when we're eating too much of these bad carbs that spike our blood sugar, which makes our body overproduce insulin because it has to, then what happens is the cells begin to resist the insulin. They begin to just not react to the insulin in a proper way. And then the body needs to make even more insulin, which causes our body to store even more fat. And it also wreaks havoc with our hunger and satiety system, which means we're constantly feeling tired and hungry and craving these bad carbs. So this is vicious circle number one when we consume too much sugar and ultra-processed foods. And here's my first tip of this lecture. If it's added, it's sugar. We have to differentiate between the natural sugars that occur in food, within the food we eat, versus added sugars. And here, there's a lot of confusion because, for example, when you eat a fruit, you are eating sugars that come naturally within the food. That is a healthy food. When you eat vegetables, there are carbohydrates and sugars in those vegetables. They can be healthy. On the other hand, when you take even natural sugars like honey, agave syrup, date honey, maple syrup, and you add them to the food, your body doesn't really care if it is a processed sugar or a natural sugar. Your body just knows you're consuming more sugar. And here's the thing, the food industry has today, I give out a list of 61 names of the most common names of sugar, but the food industry keeps adding names of sugar that they add to the foods. And some of it is in order to purposely confuse us. So it's really, really important to learn those words, learn how to read ingredients, and avoid as much as possible foods that have added sugars, even if those sugars are natural, are sugars that are found in nature or are advertised as being put there in their natural form. You're still eating more sugar. So remember, Natural sugar that is in a tomato or an apple or grapes or a banana is very, very different than a processed food or a food that you bought or even a food that you made where you added honey or date syrup or maple syrup or any of these natural sugars. Sugar is sugar. Your body is still recognizing it and metabolizing it and as added sugar. Let's talk about vicious circle number 2, which is the craving circle or the dopamine circle. Our brain, first of all, dopamine is the neurochemical in our brain that gives a message of pleasure. When we have sex, when we eat food, there is an expression of dopamine in our brain, even when we eat food regular. This is a very vital um, um, survival mechanism because we want to be motivated to eat. We want to be motivated to procreate. We want to be motivated to do the things that we need for our survival. So when we eat food, any food, people who are especially used to eating real food will get enjoyment out of eating food. But what happens when we eat these hyper delicious, hyper processed foods? Then what happens is that the dopamine expression is much, much stronger. It's we get this dopamine hit just the same way as when you have alcohol or you drugs. And then what happens is that our brain remembers this is great. This is amazing. This gave us amazing pleasure. And then the next time that we are cued, we like that memory of the wow of that food is brought up again, which by the way, the food industry does to us 24/7, cues us, eat me, drink me, eat me, drink me, eat me, drink me. Then we have a desire to eat, go to experience that pleasure once again. So basically, what's happening today with ultra processed foods, with the dopamine and craving circle, is that this survival mechanism that was keeping us alive, today, people who have that tendency to be very attracted to ultra processed foods, to richer foods, where maybe 150 years ago, we always think of these people as weak willed, but actually, like 150 years ago, people who were willing to work harder and were more motivated to eat were the people who had the bigger chances of survival. From an evolutionary and historical point of view, this is actually a strong characteristic. But in today's food environment, it becomes a weakness. So it's this survival mechanism we say in Hebrew, golem shekam al yotzo. It's like this Frankenstein thing that basically our current food environment has hijacked our brains into overstimulation of this survival mechanism. And then people who are more attracted to these delicious foods, it can really turn into an addiction. Now, we have to remember one thing. The reward center, the place where dopamine is mostly expressed, this place where we experience pleasure, is actually in the parts of our brain that have nothing to do with logic or with willpower or with knowledge. You can know a lot and still be eating in a harmful way. That's what addiction is all about. Because when these foods do is they hijack the brain, they hijack our willpower and our self-discipline. So some people can do this, just like with any addictive substance. Some people can have a piece of cake and be done with it, and that's it. The problem is today that we're having way, way too much than what is good for us. But the other problem with these foods is that for many, many people, the more they eat, rather than it like sort of you know, making that yen go away, it actually just adds to the hunger and cravings. And then the more they eat, the more they want. And then they eat even more. And then they want any more. And then it turns into this thing of where even when they don't want it, they need it or can't manage without it. And in a time like this of crisis, that can cause many, many people to go into this completely uncontrolled and obsessive eating. So this is where the dangers of ultra processed foods, like any addictive substance, like cigarettes, like alcohol, like drugs, There is the risk here that the pleasure center will be so overstimulated, especially people who are more naturally attracted to these addictive foods, that it really can go into a full-blown addiction, because the extreme of pleasure is addiction. Okay, so Leah has asked, if you're a sugar addict, your brain or body doesn't care if it's natural or not. Even sugar from grapes can trigger an addict eating more things and more different kinds of sugars. That is true, Leah. But right now, we are going to talk about people who are specifically addicted to sugar. What is the difference? But right now, this lecture is really for the general public, to give them knowledge and tips how to eat in a less harmful manner in times of crisis. Because even people who are not necessarily addicted to sugar, many times will fall into unhealthy patterns of eating during a time of crisis. So it's really, really important for people who are addicted to make sure that they're really working on their recovery, and we'll talk about that. But even people who are not necessarily addicted to these foods, and we'll talk about what that means as later on in this lecture, it's really, really important to understand that our food environment today is really what is called an obesogenic food environment. Our food environment today runs against healthy eating. Anybody who wants to eat healthy today has to make a special effort and swim against the tide, addicted or not. And here's the problem. Too much sugar is not just linked to addiction. It's linked to a whole host of diseases, and not just obesity or diabetes, but also fatty liver, heart disease, certain forms of cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's, gastrointestinal problems, fertility problems. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is closely connected to insulin resistance, autoimmune diseases, fungus infections, mental health problems. Today, more and more research is coming out about the connection between nutrition and mental health, and the list goes on. So, what is the recommended amount of added sugar per day for anyone, addicted or no? Zero. Zero is the amount of recommended sugar, added sugar. Does that mean the same way that, if you would ask, what is the recommended intake of alcohol per day? None. But some people can drink alcohol safely in moderation. Some people can eat ultra processed foods and sugary foods in moderation safely. That's okay. But don't think that there is a certain amount that is recommended to eat per day. But here's the good news. If we've now dissed ultra processed foods and sugar so much, here's the good news. When you lower your sugar intake, you lower the risk for all those diseases, that the risk becomes higher when you consume too much sugar. When you lower your sugar intake, your risk lowers with it, which means that many, many of these conditions, or the risk for developing these conditions, are reversible. And that is the good news. There are so many women, for example, who have taken part in my sugar detox program, young women who became pregnant when they did the workshop because it made them more fertile, for example. Okay, but here's the problem about ultra processed foods, right? And sweet foods. They're delicious. If we think of it as a substance of use and abuse, well, it's perfectly legal. It is not regulated in any way. It is perfectly and socially acceptable to eat it from the age of 6 months and above. It's cheap. It's everywhere. It's so easy, right? To make it, to serve it, even to chew it. Like, even ultra processed foods are like pre-chewed. You don't have to work hard to chew them like a carrot. It's comforting. It changes our mood. It changes the way we feel. And we have this perception, well, when people receive it as a gift or as a prize, it makes them happy. It makes them excited. But does it really? You know, I'm going to tell you that my three sons are in Miluim now. They're in Reserve Army now. And this past Shabbat, we went to my daughter-in-law with her four small children. My son went last Shabbat, on Shabbat. He's a very extremely religious man. He went on Shabbat to Army Reserves. He was called up. And my daughter-in-law has been with her kids alone since then. So we went on Shabbat to help her. We lived quite far away. We went on Shabbat to help her. Now, it was very beautiful to see how the whole neighborhood sort of galvanized and got together to support these women who their husbands are in the army. And they keep sending her food, and they brought babysitters, and they made an evening for the women, and they made a shiur on Shabbat. And it was like so nice to see this. But the amount of junk food that my daughter received, the amount of junk food that her kids are receiving, because they're fathers in Miluim, so we need to, like, make them happy and give them chuparim or prizes or whatever it is. It's all done with junk. And then what happens? Well, my husband went with our granddaughter to a learning, fathers and kids learning together. And at the end of the session, they were like, whose father is in the army? And my granddaughter Shira is like, me. And she gets this huge bag of chocolates and candy and chips and like bamba and all this stuff and a prize. And so of course she starts eating it, gets totally hyper from the sugar, right? And then crashes and starts crying or misbehaving, and then she starts crying. And this is what happens to kids when they eat sugar, that it happens to us too. Yeah, when we get it, we're excited. And then we eat it and it feels good for about 5 or 10 minutes, but then we crash. And it actually negatively affects our mood. So, how can we lower our sugar consumption in a time of crisis? Because it is much, much harder when our country's at war, our sons are in the army, we're worried, our stress levels are through the roof. That means that cortisol, the hormone cortisol, is higher, which causes us to be hungrier. It even causes our blood sugar to go up. So, what can we do what can we do to still keep ourselves healthy? So here are the tips that we're going to talk about today. First of all, we'll talk about the goals for during this period. We'll talk about non-food methods to reduce stress. We'll talk about how to change your environment. We'll talk about what is harm reduction and how to apply it at a time of crisis and the mindset that can help you get back on track as soon as possible. So first of all, it's really, really important at a time like this to set realistic goals. If you happen to be on a diet now, or if you think you need to go on a diet, this is not the time to begin dieting. Let's talk about maintenance. Let's talk about not gaining weight now from the point that you are at now. It's really, really important when you think about what you can do regarding your eating and your food choices and what is just not doable right now, and accept it and be soft on yourself. Ask yourself, are the things that you think you should be doing, are they really sustainable for you? Are they doable for you? Take small steps. It's better to not be so ambitious, but to make a small goal, succeed at it. It'll motivate you to get on to the next step. Just take baby steps. Do the best you can. What is the one thing that you're not doing now that you can do to lower your sugar consumption, to support yourself, to make your eating habits a little better? That is what you can ask yourself. So let's talk about non-food methods to lower stress. Just breathing, deep breathing can really help lower stress if you're feeling anxious. Meditation is like going to the gym for your brain. It really, really helps lower our stress levels. Listen to inspiring podcasts, or if you know there are certain articles or books that you read that are inspiring for you, sometimes that can be better than any kind of, relaxation pill that there is. Avoid negative media as much as possible. Remember that watching horror films and listening horror stories is not going to make any reality change. It's just going to make us feel panic and anxiety and worse. Physical activity is a huge helper for lowering stress levels. Taking a walk, physical activity. What kind of physical activity? The kind you like. That's it. Talking to someone, doing something good for someone else. What it does is it raises our serotonin levels, which are our natural antidepressants. It really does feel good to help other people. So, and it takes us also out of ourselves. Use prayer and your spirituality to help you. And feeling gratitude, even if it's for the little things in your life now, anything that you can find to feel grateful about can go a long way in helping you to reduce stress. But let's talk about if it happens that, it's a time of crisis and we do use food to mitigate stress, to lower the stress. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Let's look at it and think about it and think, how can we still keep ourselves healthy? So first of all, my biggest tip to you is what you see is what there is. That's the psychological rule of thumb. So make your food environment as safe as possible. What does that mean? That means, first of all, any junk food that's in your house that nobody's going to eat, maybe except you, get rid of it. And no, please do not give it away to the soldiers. Do not give it to your kid to take to the teacher's room if your kid's going back to school. Do not give it to your neighbor who has lots of kids so that they can enjoy it. They're getting tons of junk just like you are. They don't need it just like you don't. It's just as unhealthy and addictive for them as it is for you. It will make them moody and and tired and all the things that these foods do, they do to everybody. So why would you want to give somebody something like that, even if maybe they think it's a good thing and would thank you? I do not give away junk food anymore that I'm not using. I throw it in the garbage because that's what it is. It's junk. Maybe sometimes it's expensive junk, but here's the thing. And when I challenged around Purim, I made a challenge for people to just throw away their extra junk rather than giving it away. A friend of mine called me and she said, "You know what? I took your challenge. I had gone abroad and I bought these chocolates for my family. And I saw that no one's eating them except me. And they had been quite expensive, but nobody was interested in them except me. I don't want to eat more chocolate." So I threw it in the garbage. And this is what I can tell you. The junk food that you have decided to keep around, well, make sure that it's not sitting open on the counters and on the table or at eye level in the pantry or in the fridge or freezer. Put it on shelves where somebody really needs to consciously want it in order to eat it. So much of what we eat of these junk foods is what's called unconscious eating. It's like it's just there, so we have some, and then we forget about it and we don't remember. But here's the thing, our hips remember, our waistline remembers, our blood sugar levels, they know about it, they record it. So let's make sure that this unconscious eating is as little as possible. Any junk food that there is, put it in closed containers that are not see-through and on shelves that are high above or below eye level, so that not every time you open the pantry, it's like, hey, here I am, eat me, drink me, eat me, drink me. That's definitely a huge thing that helps. The other thing I will say to you is when you buy food in the grocery store, always read the ingredients. Look and see if you can find the same kind of food option with lower sugar content. For example, I'll give you some classic examples. Mustard, balsamic vinegar, ketchup, there's all these condiments. There are many times different choices and different brands that you can buy. Many and some have added sugar and some don't. Tomato paste. So these are things that without really changing too much in your home grocery shopping, you can actually lower your consumption of sugar significantly. Now, it might be that on a daily basis, it doesn't come out to that much sugar. But if you do this consistently, think about it, after a week, after a month, after a year of doing that, maybe over the course of a year, you have saved your family from eating, yourself and your family from eating kilograms of sugar. And over 10 years or 15 years, that could be the difference between metabolically unhealthy or mistake or keeping your metabolic health, because so many of these hidden sugars, we don't think about them, we don't know about them. And just here's the important thing to remember about sugar. White flour and starches are sugar that doesn't taste sweet. So if something has white flour in it, potato flour, rice flour, corn flour, or what it's called starches, right? It is sugar. It has in it sugar. This is sugar that has been added. So, for example, if you do eat some flour, make sure it's 100% whole grain. There's a huge difference. And you should know coffee shops never serve 100% whole grain bread. Okay, some other good tips in a time like this when people are out of their routine, maybe not at home, in strange environments where you don't have the same food choices that you have all the time. So, first of all, just take that rule of thumb, eat as much real food as you can. For example, if you happen to be in a hotel, why don't you, and there's a buffet, why don't you look around, see what's being served, and then make your decisions? And also, when you travel, always make sure to take food with you because the gas stations are basically ultra processed drug food stations. That's what it is. For me as a food addict, it's like I call that a drug, place to buy drugs. That's it. So take food with you because not always when we go traveling will there be the right choices for us. Things that you can take or even buy on the road, or if for some reason you can't take homemade food with you, there are things that you can buy. Just make sure that you take that time to either stop at a Macolet or at a supermarket or at a restaurant that serves healthy choices and buy some food for yourself. Don't just say it'll be okay, like they say in Hebrew, "Yeh beseder," because it just may not. So what are like good food choices to make when you're traveling? Tuna with salad or chicken breasts or pargit with cooked vegetables, hard-boiled eggs. If you are buying food, for example, shawarma in a tinfoil platter is a good thing. And why do I say in a tinfoil platter rather than with the in a pita or in a lapa? Because then you're having sugar. So why don't you just get it in a tinfoil thing without the French fries, or just ask them to put in just a few French fries and leave the pita out. And then you have a nice high protein meal with lots of vegetables. Um, when you do order a salad, ask them to put the sauces on the side. Always olive oil and lemon or tahina. Tahina is a good sauce option rather than these very high sugar salad dressings that are put into the salads, and ask them to put it on the side so that you can control the amount that's put in. What are good has snack options? Remember, dried fruit is basically candy, even though I will say that for a kid, giving a kid a medjool date is certainly better than a chocolate bar. But you could have around your house, even if you're not at home, you can go to a grocery store and buy these vegetables that are easy to snack on, like cherry tomatoes, baby cucumbers, baby peppers. They have those packaged carrot, baby, they're not really baby carrots, but those packaged carrot snacks that you can get. There's also like washed lettuce leaves that you can keep around. And then if you have a like the same way we talked about making a safe food environment, making a safe food environment is just what you're not leaving it around. It is what you do have available for you, that it should be cooked food and lots of healthy choices. And then when you don't feel like making something, if you're just opening the fridge and eating something, maybe it'll be then a few cherry tomatoes rather than some unhealthy choice. Here are some healthy snack options, okay? Um, Roasted chickpeas and soybeans are definitely better than roasted nuts or junk food or chips and all those things if you're looking for the salty ones. Slices of yellow cheese. Don't worry about the calories. Don't worry about the fats. Worry about the processing. If it is healthy fats that come naturally in a food, saturated or no, they're okay. What we don't want is these processed seed oils that are in ultra processed foods. Natural nuts, olives, pickles, blueberries, raspberries, frozen even, with a little bit of tahina sauce on it is a nice thing that gives you a dessert feeling. Having a lot hard-boiled eggs around in the fridge is a great thing when you're feeling like you're like hungry but you don't feel like making anything, etc. Okay, so these are things that I teach my clients, of course, in my sugar-free recovery program. But let's talk about when this isn't possible. What is harm reduction? Harm reduction is when we're not at our optimum and we can't really do what we should be doing or what we'd like to be doing. It's just not a possibility. Still, there's a lot we can do to preserve our health because just blowing it and going into uncontrolled binging and snacking and eating is a whole different ballgame than just reducing harm. Maybe like being soft on ourselves and being flexible, but still making as healthy choices as we can. So a lot of real food is better than a little junk food. Yes, from a weight gain and weight loss point of view. If you're worried about your waistline, you should know that you can eat a lot more calories of real food and you will still gain will and your waistline will probably stay in better shape than if you eat just a little junk. Eat fruit if you're looking for something sweet. A date is better than chocolate for sure when we're talking about harm reduction. And I will say that using natural sweeteners rather than sugar, like monk fruit or stevia, is a really good option. And when push comes to shove, excluding young children and pregnant women, but for adults, when push comes to shove, if you've got to have something sweet, go for the things with artificial sweeteners rather than real sugar. I know there are people who say the opposite, but I can tell you that from this point of view, it causes less cravings and less loss of control around food. And yes, the sweet taste in of itself is harmful. And don't make no, let's not fool ourselves. Artificial sweeteners are bad for you, but sugar is even worse. When all that doesn't work and you're just in the sugar and that's just what it is, here there are some mindset changes that you can use that can help you get back on track faster. First of all, stop with the diet mentality. Don't go on a diet. Don't say you have to go on a diet. Don't try to diet. Okay. Diet is die with a T at the end. Just try to eat healthier as a way of life. Anytime that you have gone for a healthier option rather than an unhealthy option, take it as a win and just stop this constant weighing yourself and counting calories and going into this diet mentality at a time like this. It's just going to make us crazy and make us binge and be in this constant feeling of failure that we're just not good enough. So just do your best and be soft on yourself. That's really the mission, because if you forgive yourself and you're soft on yourself, getting back on track will be that much easier. Now let's talk a little bit about food addiction. What is food addiction? Food addiction, like any other addiction, really is very different than people who just eat too much or, have like a little too much chocolate. Food addiction is when it becomes something that is obsessive, something that is compulsive. There are 11 criteria for addiction that really do apply also for food or sugar addiction, which is that people know the harms and they still keep consuming. It's causing negative results in their life, whether it be social results, with their ability to function, their health, their quality of life, their feeling good about themselves, all these things, or even actually physical hazard. I know people with diabetes who were eating sugar like no tomorrow before they came to my program. These are things that sort of turn on a red light for food addiction. If you want to stop, maybe you don't even enjoy it, but you find yourself eating obsessively and compulsively, hunger or no, and just constantly craving something starchy, something sweet. And this is something that takes up a lot of your time, a lot of your mind energy, and is really negatively affecting your quality of life. These could be the signs of food addiction. Food addiction, rather than just eating too much sugar, is a whole different story than that. Because if you think that you may be addicted to sugar from the things that I said, and you've tried to go it alone, well, then if you need help and you haven't been able to do it alone, get help. Because when it comes to addiction, really abstinence is the key. But here's the thing, food addiction versus other addictions like drugs, smoking, alcohol, you're using or you're not. You're smoking or you're not. You're drinking alcohol or you're not. But when it comes to food, there are a lot of gray areas. And especially because our food environment today is so, as we said, toxic to healthy eating, it really makes recovery from food addiction that much harder. So if you've been trying and haven't been succeeding, get help. And this is where I would like to offer my help to you. If you feel that you may have a problem with sugar or food addiction, please reach out to me by phone, WhatsApp, best by email, or through my site, my website, because there is hope and there is a solution and there is another way to live. And I hope that this webinar has helped you. If you have any questions for people who are watching this recording, you can also use my contact information to ask me questions, to reach out. And I want to thank you for listening and being here. So, Leah, as Leah said in the chat, you don't need alcohol or drugs to live. You can live without putting that poison into you. But food, you have no choice but to consume it. And this is true. But you don't have to consume all foods. There are certain foods that when you abstain from them, rather than it being something that's difficult, it actually, for many, many people, especially if they're addicted to food, abstaining from these ultra processed, sugary, starchy, sweet foods can actually be easier than trying to eat them in moderation. So, yes, we do need to eat, but we don't need to eat every single food that's available today for consumption. So, that's a food for thought regarding food addiction. If you enjoyed this, please reach out and tell me what you thought, and I'd love to be in touch with you. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that the next webinar that I have will be in times of peace, in times of happiness. I wish you all stay safe, do what you can to make the healthy choices. I hope that some of these tools have helped you. And if you can't, please forgive yourself and be soft on yourself. Goodbye and thank you.